What's up guys, welcome to Mike It Yourself, and for today's video we're going to change the front brake pads on the '07 Road King Blue. So let's jump into this. Damn it! Alright guys, so if you've been watching my videos, you know I recently upgraded my wheel to the 21-inch, and along with that I swapped out the rotors. But I didn't do the brake pads. I have bled the brake system just recently and cleaned up our my piston cylinders and all that stuff. Made sure everything was clean and good to go there. While doing that though, I did notice that my brake pads, they weren't necessarily worn very low, and the Harley spec on that says that they could be a minimum thickness of 0.4 millimeters, which is nothing. But I did notice that they were, I don't even know what brand they are, but they're chipped. So it doesn't hurt to, replace those out, swap them out. And what we're going to do is swap them out with these EBC brakes. What's nice about these brake pads, and I'll show you compared to these old ones, is they've got that slot cut, and you can better gauge, in my opinion, when you need to replace your brakes. Some other ones have different kind of slots, and what's nice about those ones is they're a good indicator as to if the slot is no longer visible, then it's time to be replaced. And that might be the case with these ones, and I just don't realize it. But in order to check that, what we're going to do is we're going to use a caliper to measure it out and see exactly how thick our brake pads are. So the process to remove and replace your brake pads is really simple on these style brakes. It's about 4 bolts that you're going to deal with. You got your 2 caliper bolts and then your 2 caliper pins. These pins go through the brake pad, so you'll need to pull those out. So what I recommend you do first is break these loose, because if you don't, then you'll be forced to try to do it while you're holding this in your hand, and it just gets complicated. So it's much easier to do that, and you're going to do it with I think this is either a 1/4 inch or a 6 millimeter socket, and it's the 12 point, so you need to make sure you do that. They should not be very tight, because when we tighten these back up, the torque on these is 75 to 102 inch-pounds. So there's not a lot to it, and that's because this is a really small bolt. Like there's not a lot to it, so you don't need to crank it down. So we'll go ahead and just undo this, and then we'll be able to break the caliper bolts loose and get this thing removed. Alright, so once you got them undone, it's pretty straightforward. You want to pull them out, and if you're not going to be here at your bike, so I have all my equipment right here, I would recommend you use something to hang this off of a different part of the bike to support it, so that way it's not hanging just on the brake line. That you don't want that. That's not good for your brakes. Okay, so we'll pull those out, pull the caliper off, and now we can get to the brake pads. So these aren't too bad as far as thickness, but if you look, you can see these things are busted, they're chipped. So I figure might as well replace them. So at this point, all we need to do is pull the pins. You may have to push on your brake pad a little bit to relieve the pressure, because they're kind of like spring loaded, and I'll show you in there once we get this other pin out. So you just kind of use your thumb, push in there, and you'll be able to pull that pin out. There isn't a difference, at least on these calipers, from the front and back pins. They don't make a difference. The one thing I will point out is some brake pads, you'll see have like a thicker top. So we interrupt this video to make you aware that I'm a knucklehead sometimes. So I had just said that you want this to be forward, and I'm probably going to repeat it again. That's wrong. That's applicable just to the right side. On the left side, it's going to be on the inside. This will be the inside pad. It'll still be forward, but it's going to be on the inside. And I just said it, that this is going to be always on the outside of the caliper, or the outside brake pad of the caliper, and that's only true for the right side. On the left side, it's going to be on the inner side of the caliper. So I just want to correct myself because sometimes I say stupid stuff. There, so that's going to be your outer pad going to the top or forward. So it would, thick one on the same side as your bleed screw. So just as a reminder. So let's take a look at how thick these are. All right, so these things, they're not the easiest to kind of measure on their own, but to put things in perspective, here's our caliper, and right now it's reading 2.18 millimeters. So we'll take that down to the Harley spec for the minimums, which is 0.4. So you can kind of see that opening there in the caliper would be the thickness that they would say is the minimum for you to have on your brake pad. So let me see if we can get that to... So you can see we're far beyond that. So this is still technically a good pad. So I'll probably hang on to this as a backup just in case. So when you're swapping out your pads, one of the things you're going to want to do, and in my case I've already done it, is you want to make sure your pistons or cylinders are nice and cleaned out. You may have to push these back a little bit because you are putting a newer, thicker pad in there. You want to make sure you check your reservoir, look at your fluid level there, because if you've been adding fluid as your brake pad has gone away, then when you put these newer pads, you may have a little too much in your reservoir, so you may have to adjust that. But for this video, what we're just showing is the actual replacement of the pad. All right. So in this case, things seem to be pushed in decently well. In there is that spring, or not spring, but it's like a little aluminum bracket that provides the pressure on the brake pads once you get them in, and the reason why I say you have to push down on it in order to remove that caliper pin. So let's get the new brakes out of the packaging and into the caliper. Okay, so here are the EBC pads, and like I said, they got that nice groove cut into them. Like I mentioned, you got that bigger nub there, and I have to warn you guys that EBC does send you a sticker in their packaging. So if you want to add that additional 10% horsepower by applying this sticker somewhere on your bike, go ahead and do so. But just as a warning, it's a lot of horsepower when you add stickers like this to your bike, so be careful. Who doesn't love stickers? Okay, so we're gonna go ahead and put these in the caliper. Super easy to do. Like I said, bigger nub outside, same side as your bleed screw. I just kind of lay them in there for right now, because what we're going to have to do is keep them separated. I just use my finger most of the time, and we're going to add in the caliper pin, or yeah, the caliper pins. Now, with your caliper pins, you're going to want to make sure you do apply a little bit of silicone grease to them, so that way it allows the brake pad to slide a little freely. So if you can see, you don't want to, you're not trying to cover it like all over like crazy, but you do want to have it greased so it is a lubricated surface. So you just go ahead and push those through. So you want to do one side at a time. And then once you get it seated, and what I mean by seated, it's the pin is all the way down to the threads, right? So once you got it down to its thread, then go ahead and do the other side. So this is where you're gonna have to apply a little bit of pressure. to get those holes to line up with the caliper pin hole. There you go. Easy peasy, right? All right, so we're going to go ahead and just snug these up a little bit because we are going to have to torque them down. And like I said, these are 75 to 102 inch-pounds, so make sure you get that right. Like, you don't want to put foot-pounds on this because you will damage them. If you do, you'll probably snap them off if you're trying to do, 100 foot-pounds, right? So the reason I'm doing them, or I'm snugging them up while I have the caliper kind of free floating here in my hand, is because if you have to address the brake pads at all, it's much easier to do that with this off of the bike than it is on the bike, right? If that makes sense. So now we should be able to slide this on. If we do need to press the calipers back at all, I like to use something flat like this, plastic, something that's not going to damage the metal. I wouldn't use like a screwdriver. I mean, you technically could, but you could, damage stuff by doing that. And the last thing you want to do is damage your brakes. So use something plastic that's durable enough that'll allow you to apply pressure, but not so durable that it's going to damage this, right? I want this to break before I do any damage to that. So we're going to go ahead and slide the caliper in place, put the bolts in, and we'll tighten them down. So these ones, they torque, or at least for this model, is 28 to 38 foot-pounds. So what we'll do is, just like we did with the caliper pins, we're going to go ahead and just snug them up, and we'll let the torque wrench do all the work. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get the torque wrench set up, and we'll knock these out. Okay, so we're going to start with the caliper bolts first. And you got to be real, because this is such a lighter torque, you just got to listen really closely for the breaking of the bar, so you know that you've hit your torque, because it isn't going to be loud on this. If you have a digital one, then that's very helpful. Okay. Now we'll use the inch-pound torque wrench to do our caliper pins, and I have mine set up for 85 inch-pounds. Try to find some middle ground between the 75 and 102. And again, same thing. It's not a whole lot of torque. I'm using 2 fingers, right? You just want to make sure you hit that torque. So once you've done that, you're done with this side. You do the exact same process on the other side, and then you need to pump your brakes, because they're going to have to adjust. And then after you pump your brakes, you might want to check your fluid in your reservoir just to make sure your level is appropriate. And I think according to the Harley manual, they want you to be about 1/8 of an inch from the top. Ultimately, what I look for is to make sure I don't have too much, because if you put that cap on with that rubber seal, the rubber seal will displace that and you'll get spillage. And if you're running .3, 4, or 5.1 brake fluid and it gets on your paint, you're going to eat your paint. So don't do that. If you're running .5, you're in the lucky zone where if that does get on your paint, it's not going to damage your paint. So let me go ahead and knock out the other side, and then we'll pump the brakes and take a look. All right, so now you just want to pump your brake lever a couple of times. So you see it's not offering much resistance. It's got to just pump them up a little bit. Again, I know I'm good on the fluid because I just bled my brakes, and the brake pads that I replaced, they weren't worn very much. But yeah, so once you get them all pumped up, you'll be ready to go out, do your test ride. You want to make sure they're not dragging or anything on you. And if you feel like your brakes are squishy or something like that, then you may have to do a bleed job, and that's a whole nother video. All right, guys, so again, another simple process. It's something easy to do. So if you're wanting to save a couple of bucks and swap out your own brake pads, you can do that relatively easily. There are a ton of videos out there to show you how to bleed your brakes. If you needed to rebuild your caliper, there's definitely videos on how to do that. If you need to flush your system and how to essentially add fluid to your brakes. But I wanted to keep this short, simple, just how to do the pads and just the little key things there. And again, you want to test ride it, take it easy up front. Don't try, gripping your brake like crazy after you pump them up and all that stuff and you're going for a ride. Don't just slam them or anything like that. You do want to wear them in a little bit, and yeah, just kind of check on them afterwards. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up. If you enjoyed my content, become a subscriber. And until that next video does post, I hope to see you in the wing.